When the day of the wedding finally arrived, more than 40,000 small folk ascended the hill of Rhanes to the dragon pit to bear witness to the union of the Queen Regent and the Hand. Some observers put the count even higher. Thousands more cheered Lord Rogar and Queen Alyssa in the streets as their procession made its way across the city, attended by hundreds of knights on caparisoned palfreys, and columns of septas ringing bells. Never has there been such a glory in all the annals of Westeros, wrote Grand Maester Bennifer. Lord Rogar was clad head to heel in cloth of gold beneath an antlered half-helm, whilst his bride wore a green cloak sparkling with gemstones, with the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen and the silver seahorse of the Velaryons facing one another on a divided field. Yet for all the splendor of the bride and groom, it was the arrival of Alyssa's children that set King's Landing to talking for years to come. King Jaehaerys and Princess Alysanne were the last to appear, descending from a bright sky on their dragons. Vermithor and Silverwing, the dragon pit still lacked the great dome that would be its crowning glory. It must be recalled their great leathern wings stirring up clouds of sand as they came down side by side, to the awe and terror of the gathered multitudes. The oft-told tale that the arrival of the dragons caused the aged High Septon to soil his robes is likely only a calumny. Of the ceremony itself, and the feast and bedding that followed in due course, we need say little. The Red Keep's cavernous throne room hosted the greatest of the lords and the most distinguished of the visitors from across the sea. Lesser lords, together with their knights and men-at-arms, celebrated in the yards and smaller halls of the castle, whilst the small folk of King's Landing made merry in 100 inns, wine sinks, pot shops, and brothels. Notwithstanding his purported exertions 2 nights prior, it is reliably reported that Lord Rogar performed his husbandly duties with vigor, cheered on by his drunken brothers. 7 days of tourney followed the wedding, and kept the gathered lords and the people of the city enthralled. The tilts were as hard-fought and thrilling as had been seen in Westeros in many a year, all agreed. But it was the battles fought afoot with sword and spear and axe that truly excited the passions of the crowd on this occasion, and for good reason. It will be recalled that 3 of the 7 knights who served as Maegor the Cruel's Kingsguard were dead, the remaining 4 had been sent to the wall to take the black. In their places, King Jaehaerys had thus far named only Sir Giles Morrigan and Sir Joffrey Doggett. It was the Queen Regent, Alyssa, who first put forward the idea that the remaining 5 vacancies be filled through test of arms, and what better occasion for it than the wedding, when knights from all over the realm would gather. Maegor had old men, lickspittles, cravens, and brutes about him, she declared. I want the knights protecting my son to be the finest to be found anywhere in Westeros, true honest men whose loyalty and courage is unquestioned. Let them win their cloaks with deeds of arms, whilst all the realm looks on. King Jaehaerys was quick to second his mother's notion, but with a practical twist of his own. Sagely, the young king decreed that his would-be protectors should prove their prowess afoot, not in the joust. Men who would do harm to their king seldom attack on horseback with lance in hand, his grace declared. And so it was that the tilts that followed his mother's wedding yielded pride of place to the wild melees and bloody duels the maesters would dub the war for the White Cloaks, with hundreds of knights eager to compete for the honor of serving in the Kingsguard. The combats lasted 7 full days. Several of the more colorful competitors became favorites of the small folk, who cheered them raucously each time they fought. One such was the drunken knight, Sir Willem Stafford, a short, stout, big-bellied man who always appeared so intoxicated that it was a wonder he could stand, let alone fight. The commons named him, the Keg o' Ale, and sang, Hail, hail, Keg o' Ale, whenever he took the field. Another favorite of the commons was the bard of Flea Bottom, Tom the Strummer, who mocked his foes with ribald songs before each bout. The slender mystery knight known only as the Serpent in Scarlet also had a great following. When finally defeated and unmasked, he proved to be a woman, Jonquil Dark, a bastard daughter of the Lord of Duskendale. In the end, none of these would earn a white cloak. The knights who did, though less madcap, proved themselves second to none in valor, chivalry, and skill at arms. Only one was the scion of a lordly house, Sir Lawrence Roxton, from the Reach. 2 were sworn swords, Sir Victor the Valiant, from the household of Lord Royce of Runestone, and Sir Willem the Wasp, who served Lord Smallwood of Acorn Hall. The youngest champion, Pate the Woodcock, fought with a spear instead of a sword, and some questioned whether he was a knight at all, but he proved so skillful with his chosen weapon that Sir Joffrey Doggett settled the matter by dubbing the lad himself, whilst hundreds cheered. The eldest champion was a grizzled hedge knight named Samgood of Sour Hill, a scarred and battered man of 63 who claimed to have fought in 100 battles, and never you mind on what side, that's for me and the gods to know. One-eyed, bald, and almost toothless, the knight called Sour Sam looked as gaunt as a fence post, but in battle he displayed the quickness of a man half his age, and a vicious skill honed through long decades of battles great and small. Jaehaerys the Conciliator would sit the Iron Throne for 55 years, and many a knight would wear a white cloak in his service during that long reign, more than any other monarch could boast. But it was rightly said that never did any Targaryen possess a Kingsguard who could equal the boy king's first 7. The war for the White Cloaks marked the end of the festivities of what soon became known as the Golden Wedding. As the visitors took their leaves to wend their way home to their own lands and keeps, all agreed that it had been a magnificent event. The young king had won the admiration and affection of many lords both great and small, and their sisters, wives, and daughters had only praise for the warmth shown them by Princess Alysanne. The small folk of King's Landing were pleased as well. Their boy king seemed to have every sign of being a just, merciful, and chivalrous ruler, and his hand, Lord Rhaegar, was as open-handed as he was bold in battle. Happiest of all were the city's innkeeps, taverners, brewers, merchants, cutpurses, whores, and brothel keepers, all of whom had profited mightily from the coin the visitors brought to the city. Yet though the Golden Wedding was the most lavish and far-famed of the nuptials of 49 AC, the third of the marriages made in that fateful year would prove to be the most significant. With their own wedding now safely behind them, the Queen Regent and the King's Hand next turned their attention to finding a suitable match for King Jaehaerys. And, to a lesser extent, for his sister Princess Alysanne. So long as the boy king remained unwed and without issue, the daughters of his sister Rhaena would remain his heirs. But Arya and Rhaella were still children, and, it was felt by many, manifestly unfit for the crown. Moreover, Lord Rhaegar and Queen Alyssa both feared what might befall the realm should Rhaena Targaryen return from the west to act as regent for a daughter. Though none dared speak of it, it was plain that discord had arisen between the two queens, for the daughter had neither attended her mother's wedding nor invited her to her own. And there were some who went further and whispered that Rhaena was a sorceress, who had used the dark arts to murder Maegor upon the Iron Throne. Therefore it was incumbent upon King Jaehaerys to marry and beget a son as soon as possible. The question of who the young king might marry was less easily resolved. Lord Rhaegar, who was known to harbor thoughts of extending the power of the Iron Throne across the narrow sea to Essos, put forward the notion of forging an alliance with Tyrosh by wedding Jaehaerys to the Archon's daughter, a comely girl of 15 years who had charmed all at the wedding with her wit, her flirtatious manner, and her blue-green hair. In this, however, his lordship found himself opposed by his own wife, Queen Alyssa. The small folk of Westeros would never accept a foreign girl with dyed tresses as their queen, she argued, no matter how delightful her accent. And the pious would oppose the girl bitterly, for it was known that the Tyroshi kept not the 7, but worshipped Red R'hllor, the patternmaker, three-headed trios, and other queer gods. Her own preference was to look to the houses who had risen in support of Aegon the Uncrowned in the battle beneath the god's eye. Let Jaehaerys wed a Vance, a Corbray, a Westerling, or a Piper, she urged. Loyalty should be rewarded, and by making such a match the king would honor Aegon's memory, and the valor of those who fought and died for him. It was Grand Maester Bennifer who spoke loudest against such a course, pointing out that the sincerity of their commitment to peace and reconciliation might be doubted if they were seen to favor those who had fought for Aegon over those who had remained with Maegor. A better choice, he felt, would be a daughter of one of the great houses that had taken little or no part in the battles between uncle and nephew, a Tyrell, a Hightower, and Arryn. With the King's Hand, the Queen Regent, and the Grand Maester so divided, other councillors felt emboldened to put forward candidates of their own. Prentice Tully, the royal justiciar, nominated a younger sister of his own wife, Lucinda, famed for her piety. Such a choice would surely please the faith. Daemon Balerion, the Lord Admiral, suggested that Jaehaerys might marry the widowed Queen Eleanor, of House Costain. How better to show that Maegor's supporters had been forgiven than by taking one of his black brides to queen, mayhaps even adopting her 3 sons by her first marriage. Queen Eleanor's proven fertility was another point in her favor, he argued. Lord Celtigar had 2 unwed daughters, and had famously offered Maegor his choice of them. Now he offered the same girls again for Jaehaerys. Lord Baratheon was having none of it. I have seen your daughters, Rhaegar said to Celtigar. They have no chins, no teats, and no sense. The Queen Regent and her counselors discussed the question of the king's marriage time and time again over most of a moon's turn, but came no closer to reaching a consensus. Jaehaerys himself was not privy to these debates. On this Queen Alyssa and Lord Rhaegar agreed. Though Jaehaerys might well be wise beyond his years, he was still a boy, and ruled by a boy's desires, desires that on no account could be allowed to overrule the good of the realm. Queen Alyssa in particular had no doubt whatsoever about whom her son would choose to marry were the choice left to him. Her youngest daughter, his sister the Princess Alysanne. The Targaryens had been marrying brother to sister for centuries, of course. And Jaehaerys and Alysanne had grown up expecting to wed, just as their elder siblings Aegon and Rhaena had. Moreover, Alysanne was only 2 years younger than her brother, and the two children had always been close and strong in their affection and regard for one another. Their father, King Aenys, would certainly have wished for them to marry, and once that would have been their mother's wish as well. But the horrors she had witnessed since her husband's death had persuaded Queen Alyssa to think elsewise. Though the warriors' sons and poor fellows had been disbanded and outlawed, many former members of both orders remained at large in the realm and might well take up their swords again if provoked. The Queen Regent feared their wrath, for she had vivid memories of all that had befallen her son Aegon and her daughter Rhaena when their marriage was announced. "We dare not ride that road again," she is reported to have said, more than once. In this resolve she was supported by the newest member of the court, Septon Matthias of the Most Devout, who had remained in King's Landing when the High Septon and the rest of his brethren returned to Aldtown. A great whale of a man, as famed for his corpulence as for the magnificence of his robes, Matthias claimed descent from the Gardener kings of old, who had once ruled the Reach from their seat at Highgarden. Many regarded him as a near certainty to be chosen as the next High Septon. The present occupant of that holy office, whom Septon Moon had derided as the High Lickspittle, was cautious and complacent, so there was little to no danger of any marriage being denounced from Aldtown so long as he continued to speak for the Seven from his seat in the Starry Sept. The father of the faithful was not a young man, however. The journey to King's Landing to officiate at the Golden Wedding had almost been the end of him, men said. If it should fall to me to don his mantle, his grace of course would have my support in any choice he might make, Septon Matthias assured the Queen Regent and her advisors, but not all of my brethren are so inclined, and, dare I say, there are other moons out there. Given all that has occurred, to marry brother to sister at this juncture would be seen as a grievous affront to the pious, and I fear for what might happen. Their queen's misgivings thus confirmed, Rhaegar Baratheon and the other lords put aside all consideration of Princess Alysanne as a bride for her brother Jaehaerys. The princess was 3 and 10 years of age, and had recently celebrated her first flowering, so it was thought desirable to see her wed as soon as possible. Though still far apart as regarded a suitable match for the king, the council settled swiftly on a partner for the princess. She would be married on the 7th day of the new year, to Oren Baratheon, the youngest of Lord Rhaegar's brothers. Thus it was settled by the Queen Regent and the King's Hand and their lords' counselors and advisors. But like many such arrangements through the ages, their plan was soon undone, for they had grievously underestimated the will and determination of Alysanne Targaryen herself, and her young king, Jaehaerys. No announcement had yet been made of Alysanne's betrothal, so it is not known how word of the decision reached her ears. Grand Maester Bennifer suspected a servant, for many such had come and gone whilst the lords debated in the Queen's solar. Lord Rhaegar himself was suspicious of Daemon Valerion, the Lord Admiral, a prideful man who might well have believed that the Baratheons were overreaching themselves in hopes of displacing the Lords of the Tide as the second house in the realm. Years later, when these events had passed into legend, the smallfolk would tell each other that rats in the walls had overheard the lords talking and rushed to the princess with the news. No record survives of what Alysanne Targaryen said or thought when first she learned that she was to be wed to a youth 10 years her senior, whom she scarcely knew and, if rumor can be believed, did not like. We know only what she did. Another girl might have wept or raged or run pleading to her mother. In many a sad song, maidens forced to wed against their will throw themselves from tall towers to their deaths. Princess Alysanne did none of these things. Instead she went directly to Jaehaerys. The young king was as displeased as his sister at the news. They will be making wedding plans for me as well, I do not doubt, he deduced at once. Like his sister, Jaehaerys did not waste time with reproaches, recriminations, or appeals. Instead he acted. Summoning his Kingsguard, he instructed them to sail at once for Dragonstone, where he would meet them shortly. You have sworn me your swords and your obedience, he reminded his seven. Remember those vows, and speak no word of my departure. That night, under cover of darkness, King Jaehaerys and Princess Alysanne mounted their dragons, Vermithor and Silverwing, and departed the Red Keep for the ancient Targaryen citadel below the Dragonmont. Reportedly the first words the young king spoke upon landing were, "I have need of a septon." The king, rightly, had no trust in Septon Matthias, who would surely have betrayed their plans, but the sept on Dragonstone was tended by an old man named Oswyck, who had known Jaehaerys and Alysanne since their births, and instructed them in the mysteries of the Seven throughout their childhood. As a younger man, Septon Oswyck had ministered to King Aenys, and as a boy he had served as a novice in the court of Queen Rhaenys. He was more than familiar with the Targaryen tradition of sibling marriage, and when he heard the king's command, he assented at once. The Kingsguard arrived from King's Landing by galley a few days later. The following morning, as the sun rose, Jaehaerys Targaryen, the first of his name, took to wife his sister Alysanne in the great yard at Dragonstone, before the eyes of gods and men and dragons. Septon Oswyck performed the marriage rites, though the old man's voice was thin and tremulous, no part of the ceremony was neglected. The 7 knights of the Kingsguard stood witness to the union, their white cloaks snapping in the wind. The castle's garrison and servants looked on as well, together with a good part of the small folk of the fishing village that huddled below Dragonstone's mighty curtain walls. A modest feast followed the ceremony, and many toasts were drunk to the health of the boy king and his new queen. Afterward Jaehaerys and Alysanne retired to the bedchamber where Aegon the Conqueror had once slept beside his sister Rhaenys, but in view of the bride's youth there was no bedding ceremony, and the marriage was not consummated. That omission would prove to be of great importance when Lord Rhaegar and Queen Alyssa arrived belatedly from King's Landing in a war galley, accompanied by a dozen knights, 40 men at arms, Septon Matthias, and Grand Maester Bennifer, whose letters give us the most complete accounting of what transpired. Jaehaerys and Alysanne met them inside the castle gates, holding hands. It is said that Queen Alyssa wept when she saw them. "You foolish children," she said. "You know not what you've done.